Blockchain Interoperability and Oracles. Who can we trust?
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. In this talk, we're going to be discussing interoperability and also oracles. And despite what you may think, they are very close to each other. And we'll discuss this as we go on. But let's think about where this whole space emerged from. Web 1, we had static websites that we could interact with, right? But we could not share information easily with everyone else. We required to set up web pages every time we wanted to share data. Web 2, the platform emergence, where we could use things like Facebook, YouTube, share content using centralized platforms. So we really had the centralization of the net. And now Web 3. What is Web 3 about? It's about the ability to not only share content, but to have control of the data and control of the processes undermining that content. Now, Vikas is going to start with some history around Web 3. So Vikas.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks so much for the web background, Web 1, 2, and 3. I'll dive a bit deeper into the evolution of Web 3. So, 2009, we saw Bitcoin, a nice use case of token or assets. And then came Ethereum, which started putting smart contracts into it. More with the logic and the computation part of it. I think this is what gave power to the blockchain. Later on, we saw that these assets were locked into their own chain, which started creating a lot of new chain use cases. You know, there were silos of chains created, 100, even thousands of chains today. Now, in order to move these tokens, you had to wrap those tokens to move it across chain, which was actually a solution to the previous problem, not a solution to the decentralization of blockchain in general. Then came centralized exchange for moving these tokens. Then came decentralized exchanges, and so on and so forth. So what we have seen is there has been a solution to a problem created by a previous solution, but not a solution to the generic problem of decentralization. Whether it is token interoperability, whether it is data interoperability, whether it is smart contract interoperability, or interoperability of the validators, the nodes or the servers on which all of these chains run. So today we are really going to touch upon this topic, why interoperability, multi-chain across different layers is very important for bringing true decentralization, the power of decentralization to the world. John here is working on one such idea. Maybe he can elaborate more about his use case with Infrinity and how he's trying to break it down into multiple layers with multi-wallet and data on-chain and off-chain strategy. John, over to you.
Thank you, Vikas. I think I want to speak a little less about exactly what it is we're doing. Thank you. Finally, the sound has been sorted. I could barely understand a thing both of you were saying earlier, so I guess this is a good start. I think interoperability is imperative in this industry, just because I believe that the underlying blockchain tech should matter to 0.1% of the world's population. If you're a nerd or a trader, the blockchain network that you're using matters. For everybody else, it makes no difference. It literally makes no difference. Why I think we're in an industry where people decide to sell tech based on the merits of its tech by default makes absolutely no sense. So I think the interoperability discussion is more of a discussion on what value can be enabled by blockchain, regardless of the underlying chain being used.
Indeed, John. So we do have to think about the application and the use case. However, at the same time, the technology challenges and solutions are there to achieve interoperability. And the thing is, when you are a blockchain and you try to achieve interoperability with another blockchain, really, that's an oracle. That is an untrusted entity. How do you trust that technology? How do we bridge this gap between different blockchains? We have to treat them like oracles as such. And today we were talking about potentially having two chains connected to each other. What happens if there's a fork 10 years down the road and all that history gets changed? So
But that's absolutely fine, right? I mean, like if you're making a call and you're a subscriber to Vodafone, for example, right? Does it really matter if that call is using the infrastructure of Vodafone or of a second provider? It makes no difference because it doesn't matter, right? So I think we will definitely reach some kind of reality where this interoperable infrastructure just seamlessly connects between one instance and another.
So let me try to put a perspective, which is how the utopian world would look like. And I think we can talk more about it. Let's dream, like MLK, that there's a wallet that works across all chains that is possible. So it's not a wallet built for a chain. It's a wallet which is built chain agnostic with APIs that can be plugged into any chain that is possible there. That is a utopian world for the user interface and user experience that John is talking about. Then comes the smart contract part. So my smart contract on my chain works seamless, but it won't work on another chain. That's another problem we should solve. And we should think like what Web 2 was or how Web 2 evolved with microservices approach. All of these different layers of the blockchain across the stack should work as a microservices with an API mindset as a service.
But hasn't the concept of EVM essentially solved the smart contract and interoperability problem?
So you can use the same smart contract on the different platforms, but you don't have the communication pipe between them.
Okay.
And I think what's interesting is that you're saying interoperability is where we need to go from terms of the usage, and that's 100% correct. But to get there, there is this technical interoperability challenge. How do we actually make this happen? And when you think about a blockchain and another blockchain, let's say we want to make them speak together. Blockchains cannot speak to the outside world. How are we going to overcome that? So we need to think about new innovative ways to overcome these challenges,
That's
potentially
right.
using centralized oracles.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of initiatives in that area. Look at Polkadot, for example, with its smart parachain approach. There's Wormhole that is doing a lot of initiative in this area. Near blockchain is doing quite a bit with near blockchain operating system, like the dApps approach. And then there are quite a few more, like Avalanche has 3 different chains for 3 different purposes. I think fit for purpose across the layers of blockchain will be the future in terms of choosing interoperability. An example of that would be, I would choose chain A for running my gas fees. I would choose chain B for running my smart contracts, which is interoperable, because it's efficient and secure. I would choose chain C for the data interoperability, the cross-chain communication, and so on and so forth. We saw that happening with multi-cloud as well, right, back in the day. So it's the same pattern that we'll see. So the same multi-cloud, microservices working across stack, with a services mindset rather than my chain and silo mindset.
Exactly, and I think that's exactly what we're doing at Infrinity, right? Like building out a blockchain agnostic wallet and a blockchain agnostic platform. And to your point, right, some things need to be private and some things need to be public. Some data, the majority of data needs to be off-chain.
Very good point.
And like there are very, very few instances in which raw data needs to actually be on chain. But the reality is that there is no one technical solution to rule them all. And different blockchains are like different vehicles, and they're great for different things. Like a car is absolutely fantastic at the last mile, but you wouldn't really want to use a car to get from one continent to another. You know
Indeed. I mean, when we think about the use cases, do we really need decentralization everywhere? No, we don't. In fact, centralization works really well in certain use cases. And we often think that centralization and decentralization is a binary option, on or off. No, it's a spectrum of decentralization, and we should be using the right tools for the right place. And I think that's perfectly acceptable depending on the solution. In fact, we heard someone just before say that a database is better than a blockchain. Indeed, for certain use cases, a database is, but it's centralized. And we need to now think about how can we get these different systems emerging to speak to each other, or whether we will have this one blockchain to rule them all.
Absolutely. And I also like the point of John, where he mentions that there's a very big component of what you want to put on-chain for a different purpose, like you said, Joshua, and what are the things that you want to keep off-chain, because you cannot leave the whole data, which is so valuable, where you can learn from it, right, and iterate and improve, not only the data set, but also feedback it to the chain. Very similar to what you are trying to build in your solution, John.
Yeah, the tech I believe is not at all important. I think blockchain nerds like us have done a really bad job of explaining what blockchain is, what it can do, and how it can change people's lives. And I think that's partly our fault, because we might know a little bit too much, and that's also partly the fault for everyone else, because they arguably know a bit too little. But the point is, I think we should be focusing on what the value it is that blockchain can enable, right?
In fact, what's going on right now internationally, well, in America so far, with the collapse of the banks, people are flocking towards Bitcoin as a safe means of storage. And it is this use case that we need to see. The lack of trust in centralized powers to go towards decentralized systems. And we don't care, honestly, most people who are investing, they don't care that it's Bitcoin. They just want a safe place. So we need to see these use cases emerge, indeed.
Absolutely. And that also raises another very interesting topic of interoperability in terms of governance. So governance is such a huge, interesting, and unexplored territory in Web 2, but also in the Web 3 world. Who controls the chain? How decentral is it from the political perspective, but from technical perspective, but also logic perspective, right? So the classic use case that Vitalik keeps talking about. And again, there's no one solution that fits all. It is completely use case based, depending on the use case that we pick up while building a solution on blockchain.
And yeah, whenever someone asks me what I think the Bitcoin use case is, I always pretty much come back with two answers, one of which is not at all popular, which I think personally Bitcoin is a terrible fucking currency system. It's a great replacement to central banking. Most people disagree. It's absolutely fine. I'm used to it after fucking 10 years of being in this industry. But one use case which I think everybody can agree with is there's a bunch of people that keep money under their mattress. And if you keep Bitcoin in a non-custodial wallet, it's exactly what it is. No?
True.
So, and you can use it in different ways. You can have it under your mattress, you can stick it in an exchange, and that's where the sort of interoperability aspect comes in. Not just at network level or at protocol level, but at use case level. And that's where the value is.
And coming back to what Vikas said about, let's say, okay, we have these use cases, interoperable across blockchain, smart contract, jurisdiction, which now means there are legal issues. We haven't even solved governance and legal issues when it comes to decentralized entities, DAOs, for a single jurisdiction, let alone when we have DAOs operating across jurisdiction. The only thing that regulators around the world have achieved is applying traditional centralized regulation to crypto exchanges, regulating banks, just again. Let's see how are we now going to come up with the new sphere of decentralized regulation that's adequate to host these sort of systems within them.
Absolutely. So when we talk of governance, we also talk about voting. What are the things that can be written on the chain and at what condition? The consensus algorithm, basically, that we talk about. So in the first blockchain version, we saw proof of work. And then we saw proof of stake. And in the previous panel, I heard talking about putting gun to somebody's head to take over things. I think the proof of stake also has to be re-looked at. I was reading a very nice white paper where somebody mentioned that we should bring proof of authority as a new consensus mechanism if you really want to do interoperability among chains. And now it gets even trickier and complicated. Proof of authority at what layer? Are you talking about transaction writing layer, or are you also talking about the validators that validate and approve or disapprove, but also the relayers that relay message between chains, whether this message is whitelisted or not, and can I broadcast it to the other chain? So it becomes very complicated, but there are quite a lot of initiatives around it that are happening. I think integrators, open source initiatives, universities like yours, the products that you are trying to build, John, which is not only consumed by you, but also others, these are the direction that we should take to really try to create the ecosystem around interoperability?
Yeah, I'm just really happy that the world has stopped comparing blockchains like we're comparing egos at a bar, right? It's like, my chain has this much TPS, I use this consensus algorithm. It's like, I'm just happy we're finally moving on from those conversations, because like, yes, it's important to define the inner workings and the robustness of technology, but I think if it's one thing that blockchain has proved after 10 years is that it is bloody robust. We really don't have to worry about any of that, right? We just need to worry about the value. And the value dictates that you will have many different requirements from many different use cases, from all different sectors, from all different geos, and all of those will have their own ideal solution.
Indeed. Use the right tool for the right job, and instill the right amount of decentralization in the right places. And if you're not sure about the level of decentralization, put a gun to people's heads and see whether it's possible to change something. And you know the level of decentralization.
Yeah, true. I agree.
Excellent. So we'll wrap up here. Any closing thoughts, John, on the next 5 to 10 years about interoperability?
I definitely hope that we come to a reality where blockchains begin to work together, where layer ones begin to work together a whole lot more. I think there's a bunch of grant systems out there from every different chain, which is great, but I hate that they're all focused on shilling their own token and pushing up the value of their own token. They should be working together. So what I think will happen over the next 10 years is that the individual stragglers trying to solve everything alone will just die out, and the blockchains which really survive are the layer ones which try to work together natively.
Vikas?
Completely agree with Sean there. So there is a lot of action already in this place. Like I mentioned earlier, Wormhole, Near blockchain, Polkadots, Avalanche, and a couple of other chains, Cosmos, IBC. So there has been a lot of initiative in these areas, but again, it's very siloed. Like John said, they should come together, like what Linux Foundation came at the time of building Linux, or Python community came together, saying that together we are going to take this industry forward for the good of the ecosystem, not for the good of my chain, not by increasing the value of my token. So I think that mindset is really going to take the industry forward, but I'm quite hopeful with a lot of these initiatives coming up, we'll take a very good step in the coming 2 to 3 years, where we'll see, if not all, at least 50 to 60% of these chains start working towards what we call as a common framework to interoperability.
And our time is up. Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank you so much.